My beloved child, something shifted in that quiet hospital room long before anyone found the courage to name it, and the person who finally broke the silence was the one your soulmate least expected. Their mother had been sitting near the window for what felt like hours, watching the late afternoon light move slowly across the floor while your soulmate remained only a few feet away, trying to understand why she had asked them to stay after everyone else had gone. Nothing about the moment looked dramatic from the outside. A folded sweater rested over the back of a chair. A half-finished cup of water sat untouched beside her. Your soulmate had checked their phone twice, not because they wanted to leave, but because the quiet had become so unusual that they needed somewhere else to place their attention. Then their mother looked at them differently. Not with worry. Not with disappointment. With the expression of someone who had carried a sentence for far too long and had suddenly realized that keeping it hidden was heavier than saying it aloud. "There's something about them you never knew," she said. Your soulmate did not need to ask who she meant. Somehow, they knew she was talking about you. And this is where the story becomes more personal than you might expect, because what she was preparing to reveal was not a secret about something you had done wrong. It was not a hidden mistake, an old accusation, or anything meant to change the way your soulmate saw you for the worse. It was almost the opposite. It was a truth about a moment from your past that had quietly explained something your soulmate had been trying to understand about you for a very long time. Don't skip this part, because what happened next began changing the meaning of memories they thought they already understood. Your soulmate leaned forward and asked one simple question. "What do you mean?" Their mother lowered her eyes for a moment, as though choosing carefully between everything she could say and the one thing that actually mattered. And then, unexpectedly, her composure disappeared. Her voice softened. Her eyes filled. She tried to continue, stopped, and covered her face for just a second. Your soulmate had seen her emotional before, but not like this. This was not the emotion of someone overwhelmed only by the present moment. It looked more like the release of something unfinished. Something she had meant to say years ago. Something connected directly to you. And perhaps you know that kind of silence yourself, the silence created when you have carried something quietly because explaining it seemed harder than simply living with it. Maybe there have been moments when people mistook your calmness for distance. Maybe someone wondered why you hesitate before trusting completely, why certain words matter more to you than grand gestures, why you notice details other people overlook. Your soulmate had wondered too. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. There were pieces of you they could feel without fully understanding, and now their mother was about to place one of those missing pieces into their hands. But first, she asked them something that seemed completely unrelated. "Do you remember the first time you told me about them?" Your soulmate nodded. Of course they remembered. They had tried to sound casual that day. They had mentioned you almost accidentally, as though your name had simply wandered into the conversation. But their mother had noticed the change immediately, the slight pause before your name, the unusual attention behind every small detail, the way your soulmate remembered things about you they normally would have forgotten about anyone else. She remembered too. What your soulmate did not know was that after that conversation, she had gone looking for something. Not online. Not through another person. Somewhere much closer. Inside an old drawer at home where she kept letters, photographs, cards, and little pieces of the past that nobody else ever thought about anymore. There, beneath a stack of envelopes, she had found something connected to you. And she had recognized it. Stay till the end of this part, because the object itself is not the real revelation. What it represented is what made her break down in that hospital room. Your soulmate stared at her, confused now, almost smiling from disbelief. How could you have something connected to them? They asked. Their mother did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached toward a small bag near the side of the bed and pulled out an envelope that looked older than anything else in the room. Its corners were softened with age. There was no dramatic writing across the front. No mysterious symbol. Just a name written carefully in fading ink. Your soulmate recognized the handwriting before they recognized the name. It belonged to their mother. Suddenly, the room felt different. She had written this herself. Years earlier. And somehow it was about you. Your soulmate looked from the envelope back to her face, waiting for an explanation, but she gave them something stranger instead. I never sent it. That sentence opened more questions than it answered. Why would their mother have written something involving you years ago? How could she have known anything about you before your soulmate ever introduced you? Why had the letter remained hidden? And why, after all this time, had she brought it with her now? The answer began with a day neither you nor your soulmate had ever connected to the relationship you share today. Years before your paths crossed in the way they eventually would, there had been an ordinary gathering involving people loosely connected through family acquaintances. You were not there for romance. Your soulmate was not there at all. In fact, nothing about that day seemed important enough to become a story. But something happened during those few hours that your soulmate's mother never forgot. She had watched you do something when you believed nobody important was paying attention. There was an older person at the gathering who seemed uncomfortable and mostly ignored. Conversations continued around them. People were busy. Everyone had somewhere else to look. You noticed. You moved your chair closer. You spoke with them. You listened. And when the room became busy again, you quietly helped with something small that made their evening easier. No announcement. No expectation. No one applauded you. You probably forgot about it soon afterward. But your soulmate's mother did not. This is the strange thing about kindness: the person giving it may experience only a minute, while the person witnessing it can remember it for years. Your soulmate's mother had gone home that evening thinking about you without even knowing the role you would eventually play in her child's life. Later, she learned more. Not everything. Just enough to realize that the kindness she had witnessed had not come from an easy place. You had been carrying your own private disappointment around that same time. You had reasons to withdraw. Reasons to become less generous with your heart. And yet when someone else needed gentleness, you gave it anyway. That was the truth she could never forget. Years passed. Lives moved forward. Names disappeared into the ordinary distance of memory. Then one evening, your soulmate came home and casually mentioned someone they had met. They said your name. Their mother froze. She asked them to repeat it. They laughed and asked why. She said nothing. Not then. She wanted to be certain. So she listened over the following weeks while your soulmate slowly revealed more about you, the way you sometimes became quiet when conversations grew deeply personal, the way you remembered little details, the way you could appear strong while carrying feelings you rarely explained. Every new detail reminded her of that forgotten afternoon. Still, she remained silent. Your soulmate never knew she had already seen a side of you they were only beginning to discover. And here is where her emotion in that hospital room became harder to contain. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. Your soulmate looked at the unopened envelope in their hands and asked, "Why didn't you?" Her answer came slowly. She believed some truths needed time to prove themselves. She did not want to shape your soulmate's feelings about you. She did not want an old impression, no matter how beautiful, to become a reason they trusted you before building their own understanding. She wanted them to choose what they felt without her influence. So she waited. When there were misunderstandings between you and your soulmate, she waited. When your soulmate came to her confused about something you had said or not said, she nearly revealed it, but stopped. When your soulmate wondered aloud whether your quietness meant you did not care as deeply as they did, she wanted to say, "You don't understand what I once saw." But she remained silent because she believed the answer had to emerge naturally. And eventually, it did. Your soulmate began noticing something. You did not always express care in the easiest or most obvious ways. Sometimes you expressed it through remembering, through showing up, through restraint, through giving someone room instead of demanding reassurance, through tiny actions that could easily disappear unless someone was paying attention. Those were the exact things their mother had noticed years earlier. Yet there was still something inside that envelope your soulmate had not seen. Something important was waiting for them. Their fingers rested beneath the fold, but their mother gently stopped them. "Not yet," she said. Your soulmate almost laughed from the tension of it. "You bring me an old letter about the person I love, tell me you knew something about them before I did, and now you're telling me not to open it?" For the first time that afternoon, their mother smiled. Only slightly. "Because the letter isn't the part you need to understand first." Then she revealed something your soulmate had never imagined. The letter had not originally been written to them. It had been written to you. And suddenly, the questions multiplied again. Why would their mother have written a letter to someone she barely knew? What could she possibly have wanted to tell you? And why had she carried it all these years without sending it? Your soulmate became completely still. Their mother looked toward the window again, gathering herself, and said that on the evening after she witnessed that small act of kindness, she had learned one additional detail about you from someone who knew a little of what you had been experiencing at the time. That detail changed the way she understood what she had witnessed. She went home, sat at her kitchen table, and wrote several paragraphs to a person she assumed she would probably never meet again. The letter was simple. She wanted to tell you that whatever you were going through had not made your goodness invisible. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen the choice you made to remain kind even while your own heart was carrying weight. She wanted you to know that one difficult chapter did not define the person you were becoming. But when morning came, she had no proper way to send it. So the envelope disappeared into a drawer, and life moved on. Until your name returned years later through the voice of her own child. Something inside your soulmate changed when they heard this. Think about that for a moment. The person they had been trying so hard to understand had once crossed the edge of their family's story without either of you realizing it. Not through some impossible coincidence that needed to be exaggerated, but through one small human moment. A chair moved closer. A conversation offered to someone overlooked. A quiet kindness remembered. Your soulmate lowered their eyes toward the envelope again, but now it felt completely different in their hands. It was no longer merely an old piece of paper. It was evidence that a version of you existed before they knew you, before expectations, before misunderstandings, before the complicated emotions that sometimes come with loving another person. Their mother had seen that version. And now she was telling them something they had secretly needed to hear. Some of the qualities they loved most about you were not created for them. They were already there. That realization landed deeply. Because somewhere inside your soulmate, there had been a question they were almost ashamed to admit. They had wondered whether certain beautiful parts of your connection were temporary. Whether the patience you showed would fade. Whether the tenderness beneath your guarded moments was something they had imagined because they wanted the relationship to work. Their mother's story did not guarantee a perfect future. Nothing real can promise that. But it gave them perspective. It showed them that the character they had been noticing in you had roots extending farther back than this relationship. And suddenly several old memories returned to them in a new light. The time you remembered a detail they had mentioned only once. The moment you gave them space when they expected an argument. The message you sent at exactly the moment they were having a difficult day, without even knowing how much it mattered. The times you stayed quiet not because you had nothing to say, but because you were trying to choose words that would not create unnecessary hurt. Your soulmate had experienced those moments separately. Now they began seeing the thread connecting them. Their mother saw the realization crossing their face and said something almost too quietly to hear. There is more. Just 3 words. Yet those words changed the atmosphere again. Because everything she had explained so far, the gathering, the kindness, the forgotten letter, was only why she remembered you. It was not the one truth mentioned when she first asked your soulmate to stay behind. That truth was still coming. Your soulmate lifted their eyes immediately. More than this? Their mother nodded. She reached toward the envelope again, but instead of opening it, she turned it over. On the back, beneath the sealed fold, there was a date. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. And the expression on their face changed completely. They knew that date. Not because of you. Because of themselves. It marked a day from their own past they had spoken about many times, a day when something had happened that quietly shaped the person they later became. There should have been no connection between that date and you. None that they knew of. Yet their mother was now looking at them with tears in her eyes, saying, "This is the part one never understood until recently." Your soulmate felt their heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but from the sudden sense that 2 separate stories were approaching the same point. Their mother had learned something after writing that letter. Something she had never verified until much later. Something involving an act you had taken without knowing who it would eventually affect. And when she finally connected that moment to her own child, she realized the truth she had kept from them was far more personal than simply saying she had met you once. Your soulmate placed the envelope carefully on the blanket between them. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then their mother took their hand and began telling them what really happened on that date. Why your name had remained somewhere in the edge of her memory for years, why she had become emotional the first time your soulmate brought you up, and why she now believed they deserved to know the one thing about you that could change how they understood the very beginning of your story together. And the first sentence she spoke was something your soulmate was not prepared for. Long before you knew them, something they chose to do reached your life without either of you knowing. The room went silent again. And this time, your soulmate did not look at the letter. They looked directly at their mother, because they finally understood that the real secret had never been inside the envelope. It was hidden inside the story she was only now beginning to tell. For a few seconds, your soulmate could not even decide what question to ask first, because the sentence their mother had just spoken seemed to rearrange everything they thought they understood about timing, memory, and the quiet ways one human life can touch another. Long before you knew them, something they chose to do reached your life without either of you knowing. Those words remained suspended in the room while their mother slowly released their hand and looked toward the old envelope resting between them. Your soulmate expected a dramatic explanation. Instead, she began somewhere painfully ordinary. She told them about a small community gathering that had taken place on the same date written across the back of the envelope, the date your soulmate recognized from their own past. You had been there only briefly. You were younger then, carrying your own private concerns, moving through a chapter of life that had already taught you how quickly plans could change. Nobody in that room would have looked at you and imagined that years later your name would become deeply meaningful to someone connected to them. You were simply another person helping where help was needed. And yet, near the end of that afternoon, something happened. One of the organizers discovered that a small package meant for another family had been left behind. Nothing valuable. Nothing dramatic. Inside were a few handwritten notes, a book, and a small personal item someone had asked to be delivered. People were already leaving. The person responsible for taking it could no longer go. You heard the conversation almost by accident. And you offered to help. That was all. No grand decision. No reason to believe the moment mattered. You simply said you were heading in roughly the same direction and could make sure it reached the right place. Their mother paused here, watching your soulmate carefully, because she knew what they were beginning to realize. The address on that package belonged to someone connected to your soulmate's family. Not directly to your soulmate. Not yet. But close enough that what happened next eventually became part of their own story. Your soulmate leaned forward, suddenly remembering fragments from that day they had never connected before. A family friend had visited their home that evening. They had brought something with them. There had been a conversation in the kitchen. Your soulmate had been going through a difficult moment at the time, one of those quiet turning points people rarely recognize while they are living through them. They had felt uncertain about where their life was heading. Something they had hoped for had not worked out. Their confidence had taken a small but meaningful hit, and although almost nobody knew how much it affected them, they had begun withdrawing from opportunities they once would have embraced. Then that family friend arrived carrying the package you had delivered earlier. Inside the book was a handwritten note originally meant for someone else, but because of a simple mix-up, your soulmate ended up reading it. It contained only a few sentences about continuing forward when a path changes unexpectedly. Nothing mystical. Nothing prophetic. Just kind words written by one ordinary person to another. Yet your soulmate had kept those words for years. They had mentioned them many times as something that helped them during a confusing season. They never knew how that note reached the house. They never knew who had delivered it. And they certainly never imagined that the person who carried it across town that afternoon was you. Their mother's voice softened as she said, "You were part of that day." Your soulmate immediately shook their head, almost unable to accept the connection. They didn't write the note. No, their mother replied. They didn't even know what was inside. And that distinction mattered. Because this was not a story about destiny written perfectly in advance. It was something more grounded and, in some ways, more moving. You had simply chosen to help when you could have walked away. The thing that eventually encouraged your soulmate reached them because you had quietly carried it from one place to another without knowing its significance. There was no reward. No recognition. You did not even know your soulmate existed. And perhaps that was exactly why their mother had remembered you. Something important is waiting for you here, because your soulmate's reaction was not what their mother expected. They did not smile. They became quiet. Their eyes moved toward the floor while an old memory unfolded inside them with completely new meaning. They remembered sitting alone that evening years ago with that book in their lap. They remembered reading the note twice. They remembered thinking that perhaps one disappointing chapter did not mean their future had closed. That tiny moment had encouraged them to accept an opportunity a few weeks later, an opportunity that eventually changed the direction of their life. And now they were being told that you, a stranger at the time, had unknowingly helped that message reach them. "Why didn't you tell me?" they asked again. But this time the question carried something different. Their mother looked almost apologetic. She explained that she had not known the full connection at first. She knew you had carried the package. She knew where it had gone. But she did not realize the note had eventually ended up in her own child's hands until much later. Years passed. Then your soulmate spoke about that old memory during an ordinary family conversation, describing how important those few sentences had once been. Their mother remembered the package. She remembered you. Still, the details seemed too distant to be certain. She did not want to build meaning around a coincidence she could not verify. So she kept it to herself. Then, after your soulmate met you years later, something happened that brought the memory back with unusual clarity. You told your soulmate a small story about helping someone years ago, almost as an aside. You did not remember names. You barely remembered the location. You only remembered carrying a forgotten package because everyone else had already left. Your soulmate had smiled and moved on. Their mother, however, heard the story later and felt something inside her stop. The dates matched. The place matched. The description matched. And suddenly she began wondering whether the person her child had fallen for was the same person who had unknowingly played a tiny role in one of the most formative evenings of their younger life. Still, she said nothing. She wanted proof, not imagination. So quietly, over time, she contacted the old family friend who had received the package. They remembered. Not perfectly, but enough. They remembered a younger person delivering it near dusk. They remembered being told that someone from the gathering had volunteered to bring it. And when your soulmate's mother eventually showed them an old group photograph from that event, they pointed toward you. That was when she knew. Your soulmate's eyes filled. Not because the story was impossible, but because it was so simple. You had been there at the edge of their life before either of you had a reason to remember the other. Not as a romantic figure. Not as someone trying to become important. Just as yourself. Just doing one small thing because it needed doing. Their mother watched them absorb that and then said, "That is not even the truth. I was most afraid I had waited too long to tell you." Suddenly, the entire emotional temperature of the room changed again. Your soulmate looked up quickly. Everything they had just heard already felt significant. What else could there possibly be? Their mother reached for the envelope and finally began opening it. The seal resisted at first, as though even the paper had become accustomed to remaining closed. Inside was a single folded page. She did not hand it over immediately. Instead, she held it carefully and told your soulmate why she had written it. The evening after that old gathering, she had learned from someone there that you had nearly declined to come at all. You had been dealing with disappointment in your own life. You had been tired. You had every reasonable excuse to stay home. And yet you came. You helped. You noticed people. You delivered the forgotten package. None of it looked extraordinary from the outside. But their mother had been struck by the contrast between what you were carrying privately and what you still chose to offer publicly. So she wrote you a letter. She wanted to say that she had noticed your gentleness. She wanted to tell you that one difficult season did not get to define the rest of your life. She wanted to remind you that the way you treated people when nobody was rewarding you mattered. But then something stopped her from sending it. She worried that receiving an unexpected letter from someone you barely knew might feel strange. So she put it away. Years later, when you became part of her child's life, she found the envelope again. And here came the truth she had never told your soulmate. She had read it again after meeting you properly. Then she had added one final paragraph at the bottom. Your soulmate's breath caught slightly. What did you write? Their mother looked at them and finally handed over the page. The original ink had faded slightly. The newer paragraph was darker. Your soulmate began reading silently. At first, the words were exactly what their mother had described, simple observations about kindness, resilience, and the strange importance of small decisions. Then they reached the paragraph added years later. Their eyes slowed. Their expression changed. Their mother had written that she now understood something she could never have understood on the night she first wrote the letter. The stranger whose quiet action had helped something meaningful reach her child had somehow returned years later, not carrying a package this time, but carrying a relationship neither of them could have predicted. And then came one line that made your soulmate stop completely. It was not grand. It did not claim fate. It did not promise forever. It simply said, I hope they learn to see the goodness in you that existed long before they had any reason to look for it. Your soulmate read the sentence again. This time their mother began crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the kind of tears that come when something held inside for years finally reaches the person it was meant to reach. Your soulmate moved closer and embraced her. And for several moments, the questions disappeared. There was only gratitude. Gratitude for timing. Gratitude for memory. Gratitude that one ordinary act could survive inside another person's heart long enough to be understood years later. But as the room softened, your soulmate suddenly noticed something at the bottom of the page. Beneath that final paragraph was another date. Much more recent. Only a few weeks old. Next to it, their mother had written 2 words, "Tell them." Your soulmate pulled back and pointed toward it. What does this mean? Their mother closed her eyes briefly. This was the moment she had been approaching from the beginning. Everything else had been context. The old gathering. The package. The note. The letter. All of it explained why she had remembered you. But the one truth about you they never knew was something she had discovered only recently. She told your soulmate that during a conversation with you several weeks earlier, one they had not been present for, you had said something that stayed with her. The conversation had happened casually. Your soulmate had stepped away for a few minutes. You and their mother were left alone. She asked how you were doing. You gave the usual answer first. "I'm fine." Then, after a pause, you admitted something more honest. You told her that loving someone did not always mean knowing how to show them everything happening inside you. You said there were moments when you worried your soulmate misunderstood your silence. Moments when you wanted to explain more but did not know how without making everything heavier. Their mother listened, because she recognized something in the way you spoke, the same restraint she had noticed years ago. Then you said one sentence that she never repeated to her child. Not until now. You told her, "I just want them to know I never came into their life to take something from them. I wanted to become someone who adds peace to it." Your soulmate's face changed instantly. Their mother continued. You had not been asking her to convince them of anything. You had not even known she would remember the conversation this strongly. You simply spoke honestly for a moment, then changed the subject. But she did remember. She remembered because your soulmate had recently confided something to her too. They had admitted they sometimes wondered whether they were asking too much from the relationship. Whether their own past uncertainty made them seek reassurance more often than they wanted. Whether your quiet moments meant distance. Their mother suddenly found herself holding 2 halves of the same misunderstanding. You worried that your silence made your soulmate feel uncared for. Your soulmate worried that needing reassurance made you feel burdened. Neither of you wanted to hurt the other. Both of you were protecting the relationship in ways that accidentally created more space between you. Their mother realized she had been watching 2 people care deeply while each one quietly assumed the other understood less than they actually did. That was the truth she could no longer keep. They care more than you think, she told your soulmate. But they don't always know how to translate it into the language you are waiting to hear. Your soulmate stared at the old letter in their hands. Suddenly, memories that had once felt confusing began taking on different shapes. They remembered conversations where you had gone quiet just when the emotion became deepest. They had sometimes interpreted that quietness as uncertainty. Now they wondered whether you had simply been overwhelmed by the importance of choosing the right words. They remembered moments when you changed the subject after saying something unusually vulnerable. They had thought you regretted opening up. Perhaps you were simply protecting yourself after revealing more than you normally did. And then their mother said something even more surprising. "You do it too." Your soulmate looked at her. She smiled gently through the remnants of tears. You both wait for the other person to make the first completely honest move. That landed differently. Because it was true. Your soulmate had spent so much time trying to interpret you that they had not realized you might be doing exactly the same thing with them. Each silence had become a question. Each hesitation had become a space where assumptions could grow. Yet beneath those assumptions, the intention on both sides was softer than either of you realized. Don't skip what happened next, because this was the moment your soulmate stopped treating the story as something beautiful from the past and began understanding what it demanded from the present. They folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. Then they reached for their phone. Their mother watched but said nothing. Your soulmate opened your conversation. Their thumb hovered over the screen. They started typing something, erased it, tried again, stopped. The old pattern was happening in real time. They wanted the perfect words before risking honesty. Their mother noticed and almost laughed. "There," she said. "That thing you're doing right now. That's exactly what I mean." Your soulmate looked at the unfinished message and finally laughed too. The tension in the room broke. Then they deleted everything and wrote something much simpler. "There's something I understand differently now, and when we talk, I want to listen properly." They stared at the sentence for several seconds. It was not a confession. It was not a promise. It did not force an outcome. It simply opened a door. And perhaps that was exactly what had been missing between you, not bigger feelings, but a safer doorway into the feelings already there. Their mother nodded. "Send that." Your soulmate did. The message left the screen. No dramatic music. No instant transformation. Just one honest sentence moving from one person to another. Then they placed the phone face down. Something had changed even before you responded. For the first time in a long while, your soulmate was not trying to predict what you would say. They were preparing to hear it. There is a difference. And sometimes that difference changes everything. But the story did not end there. Because while they sat beside their mother, waiting without staring at the phone, she remembered one final detail she had almost forgotten to mention. Something about the first time she truly recognized you years ago. Something that made the date on the envelope even more meaningful. She reached for the letter again and turned it toward the light. Along the lower edge was a tiny handwritten notation your soulmate had not noticed. 3 initials. One of them belonged to you. One belonged to the family friend who received the package. And the third belonged to someone your soulmate knew very well. Someone who had been part of their life long before you arrived. Your soulmate pointed at it immediately. "Why is their name here?" Their mother became quiet again. Because this name opened another part of the story, one she had not intended to explain that day. The person connected to those initials had known about you years earlier. They had known your name. They had known about the package. And when your soulmate eventually began talking about you, that person had recognized the connection almost immediately. Yet they never said a word. Not because they wanted to hide something harmful, but because they were keeping a promise made long ago. A promise connected to you. Your soulmate's phone suddenly vibrated against the small table beside them. Your message had arrived. Their eyes moved toward the screen, but for once they did not pick it up immediately. They were still looking at those 3 initials. "What promise?" they asked. Their mother inhaled slowly, knowing the answer would reveal something about you even she had only recently discovered. And as your message waited unopened beside them, she began telling your soulmate why someone from their own past had quietly protected a piece of your story for years, and why what you had asked them never to reveal might explain the deepest misunderstanding between you and the person you love.